So good morning, and
Good morning.
Larry, it's great to talk to you. I guess it's 9 a.m. over there in LA. It's noon here in Philadelphia, and thank you for taking the time to talk with me.
I'm very glad to do so.
So we were just discussing books on your father, and I had mentioned this great, small, dense little volume by Charles Rosen, which I believe I had to. I think I basically had to read the book two or maybe even three times because every paragraph I'd read the paragraph and I'd kind of scratch my head and it's like, oh, what's he saying there? I'd go through it by the second or third time through. I was like, wow, what he's saying is this is really astute and and really interesting. But it took a little time to kind of get through that first layer. And I wonder if that might be, not to be too glib, but in some ways an analogy for some of your father's music, which I found reaps great rewards. I mean, incredible rewards with persistence. But that initial contact can sometimes be, even for me as someone who plays a lot of contemporary music and a lot of 20th century music, because of course Schoenberg isn't contemporary music anymore. But the first encounter can be a little thorny sometimes.
Well, I hear that word so often, the thorny word, and you generally associate that with roses. And if
Mm.
you're if you're going to hold the rose by the stem at the wrong place, it's going to seem thorny or prickly, but you learn very quickly where to hold it and how to appreciate it and how to smell it and what the good things are about it. But the thorny thing, I think it's sort of a word that's used to make one feel that it's difficult, it's hard, it's uncomfortable. But I think you said, if you learn to where to hold the rose, um, and you can learn that pretty quickly, it's not thorny, and some people can pick up the rose without holding the thorns. Um, and of course, it depends on which work and whether there's songs, whether there's text to it, what vehicle one has to actually enjoy it. Of course, and nowadays, even though sometimes that's dismissed as irrelevant, but most people are comfortable with hearing the sounds of his music because of films, etc. And that's pretty obvious to me. Although sometimes that's, as I say, that's dismissed as well. Those are just films, and it's the video that the people are associating with, and the music is just in the background. I think that's a little bit strange way of looking at it, because we 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 create the images ourselves when we listen to the music, with Schoenberg, and in this case, some of them. And when you have his operas performed, you have the images there and that. So I think it helped. It helped significantly in terms of people feeling uncomfortable with it, and it depends on one thing he felt, and I've read this a lot about what he said. He always said it's important to have good, excellent, or good amateurs. That was his idea of getting an audience, especially for contemporary. I'll use the word contemporary for contemporary music, and he was talking about modern music at the time when he did this lecture and talked about this idea of amateurs, and as the key to good amateurs as the key to audiences.
Well, there's of course, the more you know about music, or certainly having a basic knowledge, the more avenues into that music one has. And I mean, I think of my own experiences with Indian classical music, which I know very little about, but going to a concert and the first feeling is just kind of letting the sound of these ragas or whatever, wash over you. And you don't really know what's going on. And then as I did a little bit more research and realizing there's, 1,000-year classical tradition in India, and then starting to learn a little bit more, and suddenly, the music going from just a purely kind of visceral reaction to speaking to other parts, and opening up a whole world of understanding and of beauty, which I was only able to kind of glimpse almost peripherally. And I think,
yeah, and you have to be receptive to that, so that then that tells you more about the listener than what they're listening to, whether they're really willing to be receptive, and whether they're open or whether they're very rigid. And so when we find it with Schoenberg's music, we find people that are conditioned to be rigid, and that's been perpetuated everywhere and associated with the name, and the consequence of that is that you have fewer performances of his music, because somehow the people that are running the orchestras don't feel that they'll get a sufficient audience. And that's happened. There's not much one can do about that. That's just the reality of situation, especially in America. I mean, now we're in the sesquicentennial of his birth, or the 150th year, and it's interesting to see how different organizations are reacting to that. And in Europe, it's quite different than here in the United States, and even in places in China, and with places you would not even expect it happen. I mean, most in Australia or in Mexico or in there's significantly more than what's happening in the United States. It's
well, to what would you attribute that, actually?
Pardon me?
To what would you attribute that? Like, I mean, if anything, you would think, of course, Germany and Austria, I would expect, would be receptive, but of course, he made America his home.
Yeah, I know. Well, I don't know. I've been trying for at least 4 or 5 years to get things going here in Los Angeles, and have failed miserably, just to get any interest in the local, in the orchestra, or the summer festivals that they have here. And I thought this would be a perfect idea, a perfect theme for one of the, like the Ojai Festival. I thought they would be able to do quite a bit here, and I thought the LA Philharmonic would perform things throughout the season, but no works at all. Which, I mean, it would have been a good excuse for them to do it if they wanted to do it, and there's sufficient number of works that they could do that would not, if they didn't say they could even do a lot of his arrangements of the Brahms and I mean, there's so many of those things that they could do if they wanted to, and do some of the earlier works mixed together with, let's say, the 5 pieces for orchestra. But there's enough resistance. The reason, I think the people that make the decisions, and the conductors, and just feel it's either it's something they don't themselves enjoy or like or want to do, or it's an economic thing. They're worried about sponsors. They're worried about audience. So,
well, facing this resistance, we're taking the string trio on tour. We've got 4 concerts in the Boston area, and I think 3 in England in the fall. And there was one presenter in the Boston area who was just, she said, she was like, absolutely not, no. And I was like, well, do you know the piece? Have you heard the piece? It's like, oh, I don't like Schoenberg, and it's incredible because it can, I mean, his music is capable of taking you to the most extraordinary and sublime places, just in terms of pure beauty in spots. And of course, it's not all beauty, and music is not all about beauty. In fact, right? It can be disturbing and sad and exciting and vivacious, but it's not just beauty. But if that's what one is looking for, and if they're looking for just sheer gorgeous sound, in fact, there are places he can take you that are the Elysium fields. I think of not in the string trio, in terms of the first example that pops into mind is that entrance of the soprano in the second quartet. And I'm just getting, the hairs on the back of my neck are just going up, just thinking of that one spot. And it's this resistance to it. But I wonder how much some of that is maybe partly, your father, it seems like there's this contradiction, because he wasn't afraid to say things sometimes which didn't necessarily, I put it delicately, didn't necessarily help further his cause in some instances.
I think you can extract those things if you want to look for the things where he did that, but he also did exactly the opposite. The things that he did to try to advance it, not just even his own music, but the Verein für musikalische Beobachtung, those things where he actually, and those weren't his works; those were works from contemporary composers.
You can explain I believe that's the organization for
the private performance, where they didn't. It's so interesting where they didn't present the works until they were really prepared to present them. That's number one. I think that people talk about all the different things about it, but the one thing was the performance practice and the ideas. They didn't announce which works were going to be performed, and they didn't perform them until they really felt they were sufficiently well rehearsed.
And this was in around the beginning of the 20th century, I believe.
In Vienna, and the idea was to educate audiences, and the audiences were asked not to respond, not to clap, but just to listen.
Right.
And so it didn't last it only lasted a few years, but that was also, his idea of how one should approach this. That wasn't, certainly you couldn't say that that's well, I guess you could say it's contrary to what one would expect, but you wouldn't call him a contrarian for that. It was the opposite. Or if he was doing things that at least he felt would benefit in the long range, either its own things, in this case, just generally music. And you can see that in his writings everywhere, where he was always looking for, if there was a problem, he was looking for a solution. And you can see that in every part of his life. And that's something that I grew up with, where you can identify the idea. You can see him looking at a problem and resolving the problem. And you could, in a large scale, you could include the composition with 12 tones as that. The problem for him was with respect to composing. For him, he needed those sort of these rules and things. So that was something for him. But in everything else in his life, and as a child, when I grew up, I could see that. And I would see that in the little things that he constructed, the extra musical, the non-musical things, and all the little what they call Boston little things that he'd make in his room, and toys that he would make for us, and things that were constructed because he thought he had a better way of doing it. He made a little Scotch tape dispenser before there were Scotch tape dispensers, and all kinds of things around the house that I recall. And always looking for, quote, a better way of of doing things or a way to resolve a problem. Not in a contrary. I mean, it's a very positive way to do it. Identify what's wrong or what you feel needs to be done, and then do it. He didn't stop by saying, "Oh, something here doesn't work," or this is wrong. He would then go on and resolve it, and that's something I've learned or experienced from very early on.
My impression from him is well, several, but one is just passion and an incredible level of artistic integrity, but also this idea of, as you're saying, a problem solver, and even his whole approach to, first, what we call atonality, and then the 12-tone system, very much what would you call it, right? He saw it more as an evolution of classical music than a revolution, and a place where music had kind of, and correct me if I'm wrong, but music had kind of reached a point at which it couldn't go further where it was. And
that's exactly how he felt, and he wrote about it and he explained it. That doesn't, unfortunately, not a lot of people have paid attention to what he's written, because he's very clear on that, on what it was, and there's some very surprising things about that surprising to other people. They think, well, when he was teaching, which was something he did almost all his life, he wasn't teaching how to compose. He wasn't teaching people how to compose a composition with 12 tones. He was teaching them the basics, what led him up to how he evolved. And I think that's really important to see that was who he was, in the sense, and what he was trying to give to the younger composers, not to make them into Schoenbergian composers, which maybe other people did later after he died, and there may have been kind of funny consequences about that, but that wasn't what he did. And the consequence of that was you had this amazing variety of composers that one mainly talks about Webern and Berg, but there's a whole other number of composers and people that he taught, and especially here in the United States, people that became composers that went in completely different directions, but we're still based a lot on what their, at least, and you use the word integrity, they got that from them, and his ethics. And I think those are the things that as children we learned really early too. When I look at, I got this idea of the important thing is the ethics, and we got that in our family life very, very, very early on, and I think now reflect back, and that's something that's been really important for us.
Well, he seems like, again, from what I've read and some of your previous interviews that I've listened to, that he seems like he was a very, very tender and involved and loving father, actually.
Yeah, I was, it's important to note that I was 10 years old when he died. And the last few years he was not well, but we had a very, very close family. We did walks and things up around the neighborhood, and we were very much involved with parties, birthday parties, whether it was his birthday or our birthdays, and he was completely involved in that. It was very much a sort of what one call a conventional family, happy family life. And you can, I wonder sometimes, I look at my brother and sister now, and I see how we are together, and it's all a product of that youth we had with him. One thing that was really interesting, and all three of us reflect on this, is that we grew up with the idea that the heroes were, as a young child, would have been the mailman or the ice, the one that brought the ice for the ice box, or as my brother says, the master hot dog maker. And we had this thing from our father, and now thinking about it now, it didn't have to be some special intellectual person. It didn't have to be someone super talented in a particular field. It was sort of the ordinary person that was doing their job and doing it well. And it was ingrained in us that became a hero for us. That was someone to emulate. That was someone that did their job well. Now that, thinking about it later, that's kind of interesting to think that, the mailman is someone you should really respect. That was something that we got. I mean, I got that at a young age. I didn't have to go, I'm thinking of things that a little child would pick up, and that was something I got from my father early on, and my brother and sister too. Talk about that.
Was music discussed in your house? Because I know your mother was, of course, a Polish and this great, musical royalty. She was a wonderful musician, and her brother was Rudolf Polish.
Yeah, I don't know. My mother was not a musician. I don't think she's actually was a wannabe playwright, and she wrote the libretto for Von heute auf morgen, it's opera. She had a pen named Jolly Joker, and she did a lot. She did a lot of writing, but none of it really ever went very far. She didn't. It wasn't that nothing was ever. She didn't become published or accomplished in that. She was devoted to my father. And again, you say the part of the college is in my uncle Rudy, I can call him the left-handed violinist. He was, we always called him, or I always called him my favorite uncle, but then I realized he was the only uncle, but he would come often and visit, and we were very, very, very close. And but the family itself, Rudy and the mother, there was another older sister that my mother had, Mitzi Kolish, and she lived I think later she moved in San Francisco, but not so, and she was not particularly musical either. So it was Rudolf Kolish was the main musician, and he was a student of my father's. And then, of course, well about how he performed, and he had the quartets, the Pro Arte Quartet in Madison, Wisconsin University, and of course the famous Kolish Quartet before.
Well, there was also your father's first wife who passed away, in the Zemlinsky family, Matilda Zemlinsky, and of course Alexander, who was a wonderful composer. Are you in touch with this side?
Actually, no, not really. We never. Nuria, I think, was Nuria's older, and she had some kind of with, I think, Susie with some, but I'm not really positive. But I didn't grow up knowing very much about it, and it's only what I've learned and know since then, and it's been very little connection, at least for me.
Did you and your siblings play any instruments, and would either your parents come to music lessons or listen to you play, or?
Yeah. You really want an answer to that? Okay. I played at the violin when I was very young, very poorly. I would say probably was playing probably around 6 or 7 years old, and playing downstairs, playing a little bit, and I could hear my father yell, "Fush." Well, I knew it was fush. I knew that my ear was good enough to know that this isn't the way it should sound. So I had a really short career. I played violin. I played the cello after cello. I played the piano a little bit later, had some lessons, but my intonation was better, but my skills were lacking. So for me, no musical. I inherited some things from my father. I inherited the humor, and I think I inherited a little bit of what I call the angry gene. That I get angry when I see things that are where he's misquoted, and I respond to them. So I have those two. The humor thing was prevalent in everything that we had growing up. My brother Ronnie played the cello, and I don't know if he'd admit it, but he didn't. I don't think he played that well either, but he did play the cello. And Nuria didn't. She sang. I don't think Nuria played any instrument either. So the answer is no, and my joke is I always wanted to be a second violinist.
Well, right now I believe you're running the Arnold Schoenberg Center in Vienna, or you have some connection to it, and of course
Not
there's
quite.
Belmont Publishing.
Yeah, we did. Belmont Music Publishers is an interesting phenomena that happened because when my father's opera, Moses and Aaron, the Schutz, published that. And after the score was published, nobody could get a hold of it in America. And so my mother ordered copies and had them sent here. And then she sold them. And it turned out she was selling them for less than whatever she was paying for. So she wasn't really none of us was very good at business. Mm. In fact, that was a dirty word in the family because they always talked about, they used the word for publishers, gauna. You know the word gauna?
I didn't know it, no.
It's not a happy word. Let's see, the English equivalent would be someone that rips you off.
Okay.
Okay. So anyway, that was my association with business. We were not very much into business. My mother didn't do a good start. I helped her, and then this started in the 60s, and it's continued. And then we took over the Universal Edition publications for the United States and Canada and Mexico. And we've done quite well because we've had the luxury of not being a business in the sense that partly a business, but also it's the main idea is to make the things accessible, available, and we've been able to do that pretty successfully until now. It's still going well. The wonderful thing that we did, the three of us, Nuria, Ronnie, and I, was helped establish the archives, the center in Vienna, which has been going for 25 years now, which is a little bit astonishing. It was here at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles, and we got evicted because it wasn't, in their quote, they weren't getting, quote, enough bang for the buck. Okay, so we were very lucky that we were able to
And of
move.
all places that should be delighted to house that.
Well, it should be, but there wasn't whatever there wasn't. They didn't feel it was going to make enough money, and so my response was, "Well, how's the library doing?" And they said it was just that they wanted the property. Even though all of it was donated, most of the money for the building and everything came from all kinds of different sources. So it was a good opportunity for the university to reclaim the land and build I think they build a cinema school there now. So which does really well in their mind, and they do get they do get bang for their buck for that.
Sure.
So I'd
argue that's not what universities are for. They're not for.
Well,
bang for your
that's not
buck.
what they, that's
But I'm
not
a
what,
musician, so you know.
yeah. And then it's especially troubling in California where it was the state did a lot of the subsidy for the universities, but this was a private university, USC, but even for the state universities. And so once they decided, or the population decided, there was a proposition where they no longer funded or didn't have the funds for the universities, then the universities, the public ones, also had to go and scrounge around, and they are in the process also right now. If you go to a public university in California, they're scrounging around trying to get money for things that, especially for things that don't, quote, make money. So it's a tough time in that case for the universities. But we were so fortunate that we were able to move the things to Vienna, and it was a tough decision. It was, in a sense, the tough part of it was, do we really think it should be moved back to Vienna? And then the argument that we made in our rationale and justification was, they're not, Hitler isn't going to tell us what we should do. The idea is, okay, it's going to go there, and it has been flourishing. It's so accessible, easily accessible. It's done all the things that we wanted it to do, in the sense of, if someone's interested in getting material or getting involved in it, it's really something simple. There's no constraints, or a few constraints as possible, getting materials, etc., from them. And that's been really wonderful. They have a terrific staff, and just got a new director who was really wonderful. So that was something
Yeah,
we were very optimistic.
I'll make sure to stop by, actually.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting because, yeah, I mean, my own experience with publishers has been, there have been contemporary pieces I've wanted to. Oh, sorry, I thought I turned this off. There have been contemporary pieces that I've wanted to get a copy of to perform, and have contacted the publishers, and then some exorbitant price,
Yeah.
or it's just impossible to get the parts, and
Yeah.
so difficult.
Yeah.
And when we had this idea, went for the string trio in Newburyport to do the concert and to make the score available to the audience.
Yeah, I heard about that, and that is such a wonderful idea. I concur. I mean, we talked about that, and it's just such a great idea. There's obviously lots of ways to appreciate a work, and I mean, historically, I don't know if you can remember, when people would go to concert, they'd have the scores. They'd sit there with the scores. I haven't seen that in years anymore. Maybe because everything's digital. A lot of things are digital, but the idea of having the audience the opportunity to actually follow the score, I think, and especially for the string trio, where even if you can't read music, if you look at that, you can see it. You can actually see all the things, as it moves. I don't know. I say, from breathing in to breathing out, or I can use a sports analogy of something really happens aggressively, and then there's the interlude where things are quiet, and then the next play happens, if it's in a football game. But there's that feeling in life where we have things happening and then calming down, or that's been interpreted so many different ways. But the score itself, independent of whether you can see it in the score, obviously.
It's almost like graphic notation in that sense.
It is. It really is. So I'm interested to see how that works. It's a great idea. I mean, I think
you and your wife, who I contacted, who originally put me through to you, were so. Again, I wasn't sure. I've had bad experiences when I've contacted publishers, and they're just like, no, I don't think so. or the putting forth the idea of showing the scores as no, that'll be too much trouble.
Yeah.
But you guys were immediately yes,
Yeah.
good. That's great.
Yeah, we talked about it, and it's just it's a wonderful idea. I mean, it can only enhance the opportunity to enjoy the music for the listener only.
Well, may I ask you about the trio? I know it might be a sensitive topic just because it's in from what I understand, even in his own words, your father was an autobiographical work of a very difficult part of his life. And what memories of that?
Yeah, I've only read about that afterwards, obviously. Remember, I wouldn't have known any of that at the time. The only thing I do recall was, when he had the heart attack, or an ambulance brought him back once, and I remember the ambulance coming in, and that was somewhat dramatic for me, just seeing that and that stuff. But as far as the work itself, I only know what I've read, what he wrote, about it, and of course he sort of points to different places in there, which I'm not. Yeah, I mean, I think almost, if you don't need anyone to tell you where and what, you can almost hear it. But and I'm not sure. I don't know how much that. It's another way of approaching the work. It's not the way. I mean, you can say that about any work in of any composer, but I think back to Verklärte Nacht or Transfigured Night is the same thing. You don't really need to know the Demel poem. It's a way of appreciating it, and maybe feeling more liking the work a little more if you go to the text. But I mean, here, of course, in the trio, the text would be what he's written. So I think it's another vehicle that one can use to appreciate what's going on. I think you can, independent of that, I think you can. I hate to use the word enjoy because it's the wrong word. Empathize, and you can have some feeling, and you can have the emotional feelings that make you want to hear. I guess the best thing, that make you want to hear it again.
Right.
Maybe that's sort of the clue. Do you want to listen to this again, or is that it? And I think you don't. It's sometimes having those little keys and things, that maybe his text or looking at the notes, that may help you. And maybe you're just the kind of person that can just sit there and listen to it and say, oh, I want to listen to this again. I want to listen. And then you listen. And that's one thing I must say that I agree. I've that's something that I did read recently in that book by Sachs, is that the listening, repeated listening is really important. But you're not going to listen a second time if nothing caught you the first time. So
that's true. That's true. Well, I had a wonderful Michelangelo teacher in college, and he would talk about the painting being the primary text, and you can read things into it afterwards, but ultimately the artistic experience, it starts with the painting and it ends with the painting. And I think that's true of music too. So the string trio, again, there are ways to enter it. You can enter it from, straight on, or from the side and through the story, or just purely as sound. But in the end, the piece is the piece, and it's our experience of it. And it's just incredible music that swings, emotionally takes you so many different places, from stress and anxiety to, as you mentioned before, moments of transcendent beauty, and it's
really a work that one really needs to listen to live.
Yes.
It doesn't, well, once you've heard it live or seen it live, or you empathize with the performers, okay, then you can listen to it. You can listen to recordings, or you can, but I think, maybe it's true for most music, but I think it really is helpful, at least in the first time, is to actually see people performing, to watch them perform, to watch them playing. It really does enhance it. I had that experience with not the string trio, but with the wind quintet, and I'd only heard the wind quintet, which on at that time it would have been phonograph recordings, or maybe a cassette tape or something, and it was really hard to. I really had a lot of difficulty. And then one time, and maybe I did see it performed. Then when I was in Vienna and I saw members of the Vienna Philharmonic perform it. This was a long time ago. This was in 1974, and it was just a revelation for me. It was just so incredible. But part of that was I'm sure it was the visual, watching these people perform it as if they're playing a Strauss waltz.
Mm.
And they were moving as if, and that's something that was, you can't do that on a recording.
Well, in fact, for usually what I do before these concerts in Newburyport is I'll talk about the piece in little blog, and many times I'll include a recording for people to listen to, because some people like to listen to ahead to get in their ear.
Right.
I'm not doing that for the Schoenberg, because
Yeah.
I don't, exactly as you said, for someone's first encounter with the piece, I really feel it must be live. And I know my own struggles with it. I had many teachers who had adored the piece. One in particular, Mark Sokol from the Concord Quartet.
Mm-hmm.
And they would talk about the piece, and I finally got around to listening to it and recording. And my first reaction was just like, I know these people I admire and who I trust love this, but I don't get it, and I'm having a hard time with it. And it took some time on my part and some faith, right? To listen to it, and for it to start to reveal itself to the point where I was like, wow, this is amazing. And then to play it, I've played it a few times now. And I have to say, every time I've done it, I'll talk to some people beforehand and before the concert, and there's often some skepticism, as we discussed. But then I'll discuss the piece in the concert, and every time the audience unanimously is pretty much blown away. And even the most conservative concert goers who entered skeptical, and I've had people come up to me and say, look, I thought I was going to hate this piece. I expected to hate this piece. I might have, some of them might have even been, I was looking forward to hating this piece. And it hit me like a hammer. The last performance, there was someone who was crying at the end. And I find this with much of your father's music is just, it really, if people will open their minds to it, they're profoundly affected by this music. So,
Smell the rose.
Yes, right. Well, let me ask you two questions. I guess one is, where would you suggest? Let's say I'm someone, and I've never listened to Schoenberg before. I go to concert, classical concert, once or twice a year. I go to the symphony or something, and I'm, I hear the word Schoenberg, I'm like, oh, I won't like that stuff. Where would you suggest, or how would you suggest someone start with your father's music? Where would be a good place to start?
I would tell them, don't read anything about it.
Okay.
Number one. Two, if they have the time, listen to the Girl Eater, the
Sure.
whole Girl Eater,
Okay.
first and second and third parts of the Girl Eater. Just listen to it, and or they can actually it's on the YouTube, so you can get plenty of performances. There's even an opera they did in Amsterdam with it, so you can, even if you need to watch something, you can watch it. So I would start with the Girl Eater if they have the time.
Well,
If
just for sheer ravishing beauty,
Yes,
the
yeah,
opening measures of that piece,
yeah,
people are just like, oh, okay,
right,
this is
yeah.
going to
They're
be
not gonna, yeah, right. It captures you, and then you get to, if you stick with it all the way through to the end, you get to hear just about everything. And I think he answered somewhere something similar to that, where he said, that Girl Eater was important for people to with his music.
Mhm.
And it makes sense because you go all the way through to the speaker at the end, and the chorus, and then of course the chorus at the end. So you don't, it doesn't give you a chance to say, oh God, that was terrible. No, you don't have a chance on that. Yeah, if you're willing to go through the whatever hour and a half or so. If you don't have the time, I mean, there's some Opus 8 songs that nobody, that you might want to listen to. If you want to listen to songs, you might want to listen to some of those. Um, I don't have the luxury of having favorites. I have to like them all because of my last name.
Mhm. Well,
So
I was leading up to that, in fact.
yeah, I can't, I have to try and I have to look at each thing, and which other people do. And very often I'll learn from other people why Opus 33B is so important and why that's so meaningful to them, when I thought, well, okay, it's just another one of his piano pieces. So I'll myself will learn from people that think that a work is particularly important. Um, if you're gonna, if you're again, if you're willing to listen to long things, then I would jump from the Big Jump, but I would jump from the Girl Eater to Moses and Aaron, the opera.
Okay.
Again, it's asking a lot, but then you get to go from one end to the other end. In between, and if you're a musician, I would, then I should more so, you should listen to the five pieces for orchestra or the variations for orchestra, things like that. And of course, if you're a chamber music player, you can go through the quartets.
Right.
And the progression of, if you're willing to go through all, although I think the numbers are wrong on the fourth and third. It should be, well, no, I'm joking, but the easier to listen to the fourth quartet and then the third quartet.
Okay.
So you might want to, and then there's the zeroth quartet, which is a lot of fun to listen to. So there's five
Very
of them.
early. Yeah. It's like
They always,
D major or F major?
yes, yeah, D major. Is it? Yes. But yeah, and it has the most beautiful melodies in there that you can just pull out. In fact, one time people were always complaining about, oh, his music, there's no melodies in the music. So I did a silly thing once. I did a YouTube video just for these people saying, okay, if you really need melodies in Schoenberg's music, here it is. And I just put a whole bunch of them together and even used some things from the piano suite, Opus 25, and things from Moses and Aaron. So I don't think I got something for variations, but I did pick it from what are considered 12-tone compositions, also melodies, as I would define melodies, or things that you can repeat. There was always
And at the end of the string trio, the
yeah,
final melody, the final waltz before the
yeah, yeah.
it's gorgeous.
My next version, I'll stick that in. Thank you. So it's a continuous effort on my part to help people appreciate or direct them to where they can enjoy his music. But again, those are the works I would start with the Girl Eater, and then if they're willing to, go to the Moses and Aaron, and then what we've done, we did something, we did something really interesting, I think, which is really good. And I've done it on the Belmont website, or there's a website associated with that called Explore Arnold Schoenberg, and then the center's website. And from Vienna, we've made accessible recordings of everything. So you can listen to if you want to listen to anything of any of his works, even from the really, really early waltzes that he did. There are 10 early waltzes that they're just doing with kids now, are doing that in Vienna, performing those. All the way through every single work, even ones that are not even published, some of the fragments and things. So if one wants to listen to them, it's all there, and you don't have to. It's easily, as I said, that's the code is easily accessible.
Right, I'll put a link to that.
Yeah.
It's also so. Well, Larry, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me, and
Pleasure.
This was delightful. So
Good.
thank you
Great.
so much.
Thank you so much.
Okay.